here's the situation. For those of you who are wondering, like Hasan, let me catch you up. Because a lot of you haven't really been following closely. A lot of people are just tuning in because the election is tomorrow. Many people want to know what the is up. Now, something that I've found out is that on my TikTok, the people are crazy. I usually agree with you, but I think she's had a great campaign. She's had a great campaign. This is the TikTok we posted about my like broader analysis on, on what I think is happening with Kamala's campaign and what I think is going to happen come November 5th or maybe November 6th. Originally, when this was a matchup between Joe Biden and Donald Trump pre-debate, I was saying, looking at 2022 performance, looking at the normal white theory, looking at vibes overall, I said that Joe Biden still had a likelihood of winning the election, albeit marginally. Then the debate happened and everyone recognized that Joe Biden was he was so old that his brain was leaking out of his ear. And then, of course, once everyone else recognized the thing that we have known for years and years and years, then it became impossible. After that, my analysis was it's over. Then Trump got shot. On top of that, I was like, it's done. Even if Trump, especially if Trump hits the unity line, regardless, if he goes up against Joe Biden, he is going to win. And that was an absolute certainty. I gave you my lock. I said Donald Trump was going to win the election against Joe Biden. Then the RNC happened. Donald Trump did not go the unity route. Donald Trump chose J.D. Vance. That was a massive flub, massive mistake for him. That was a base pick because he was still gearing up for running against Joe Biden, which he thought would be a cakewalk for a W. Okay. And then the unthinkable happened. The Democratic Party responded to public pressure. Public pressure and donor pressure aligned in this beautiful moment, and establishment Democrats actually swapped out Joseph Robinette Brandon for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris then picked Tim Walz. Kamala Harris, in that short period of time, basically went from a relatively lesser known generic Democrat to the person that was running for president. There was no electoral process that took place, which some people were frustrated by, and I totally understand why they were upset by it. Kamala Harris assumed that role. And in perhaps like a week-long period, Kamala Harris went from a lesser-known generic Democrat who was the vice president that people didn't really think about, people didn't know that well, to a person that had made up 10 points in the opposite direction and had caught back up to Donald Trump. It went from Joe Biden is definitely losing to Donald Trump to, oh my God, Kamala Harris has a pretty good chance of winning. Now, that paired up with the fact that high propensity voters were coming out and had come out already for Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, and the down ballot races outperforming Joe Biden at the time and even outperforming Kamala Harris at the time by like 6, sometimes 7 points in these key races in swing states, made me understand that there is a lot of momentum and a lot of energy in the Democratic Party's direction. They just need a competent leadership. However, after the DNC, I kept repeating over and over again that the Kamala Harris campaign and the direction the Democratic Party was taking was basically running towards Joe Biden, who was seen as a old curmudgeon, who was basically very unpopular, so unpopular that he had to do something unceremonious. He had to do something unique. He had to drop out of the race and, be swapped out for his vice president. All of that aside, Kamala Harris still had the fundamentals. I kept maintaining the position that if she builds upon the momentum and actually has a bold policy agenda, talking and communicating how she's going to be different than the existing administration, that she would have a tremendous time in the polls. She would have a much better standing in the polls, that people would be openly, defending her. Some of the issues was immigration. Another issue was on the economy front. I think that her policies were definitely, there was some good there, but there was a lot that was just lackluster. And the tacking to the center, tacking to the right, and the consistent hugging and kissing Republicans, all of that, in my opinion, was bad campaigning for the most part. But as I said, time and time again, throughout this process, the liberals who would come at me and say, Hasan, you just don't want Kamala Harris to win because of Gaza, blah, blah, blah. I kept repeating, that's not the only issue I have with the campaign, although that is definitely an issue I have with the campaign, that she would still most likely win. Now, the last month or so was a little bit different because I think that Kamala Harris became more prominent in the last month, a lot more media opportunities. She put herself out there and she started pumping hundreds or tens of millions of dollars worth of ads with the campaign messages that they had aligned. And in that process, it seemingly backfired on the Harris camp, and instead Republicans started gaining more momentum. Republicans started gaining momentum in down ballot races, but more importantly, Donald Trump started gaining momentum. I still, however, maintain the position until this day, and I still maintain this position that Kamala Harris will most likely win the election come tomorrow. And this is not just me looking at the polls, even though, of course, I have looked at the polls this entire time, but also looking at the vibes. I don't just do poll analysis, I do polls plus vibes. Why do I do this? Well, the reason why I do polls plus vibes is because polls alone are not going to be enough. I have, however, learned something that's a little bit scary today, this morning. I've told you guys already, I have like a bunch of people that I talk to, normies in general. You know, I have some high propensity voters, mid propensity voters, and low propensity voters in a place like California. And I look to who they vote for and how they vote as well, because I just want to kind of see like, a focus group basically. And my low propensity voter did vote for Donald Trump, which was shocking. And I don't know if it's because I basically kept asking him over and over again if he was going to go out and vote or not. But my low propensity conspiracy theory guy who loves RFK did actually end up voting. And that kind of shocked me a little bit. That kind of worried me a little bit, because this is California. It doesn't mean California's going to flip, obviously. But what it means is, even in a place where someone who is not likely to go out and vote at all, where his vote is not even going to matter at all, he found time out of his day to go out and vote, even though he has never gone out and voted before. That to me is a little troublesome. I haven't really seen this anywhere else in the data, but that still scares me regardless. Having said that, however, I think that the fundamentals are on Kamala Harris's side still. Now that I've talked about the Kamala Harris side of things and what I consider to be like not great campaigning, for example, I think that she focused far too much on trying to win over the white suburban mothers, and you can win them over. No one is saying don't try to win them over, but the way to win them over is supposed to be a delicate balance where you're not hemorrhaging your base of support, because you cannot let the urban pop fall apart. You cannot let the urban population, black voters, brown voters, young voters in general, voters in college, students and the like, not come out and vote for you because they are just like too bored and too grossed out by or too depressed to go out and vote, because they just constantly hear you hugging and kissing the likes of Liz Cheney or saying you're going to have a Republican in your cabinet. It's not good. It is not good. She needs white women. I understand that. I'm not against that, but there's a way to do that while simultaneously still communicating objectively popular policies to the low and mid propensity voters on the Democratic Party side, but they haven't done that at all. They've hyper-focused on high propensity voters in general. They're banking on a low turnout election. That's not good. Other aspects of the campaign that I took issue with, the fact that her addressing the economic harm that people were experiencing, even though she was given a massive gift, where voters did not actually hold her responsible for the problems of the Biden administration and its impact on the economy and the inflation and the negative real wage growth that they experienced under Biden for a brief moment. That kind of stuff is unforgettable for a lot of voters, but they actually originally did not say Kamala Harris was responsible for that. Now that's good. That's a massive gift for Kamala Harris. What did she do with that gift? Not much. The price gouging stuff was great. Fantastic messaging, fantastic policy, fully on board with that, right? But they didn't go forward with that too aggressively. And instead, they kind of backpocketed that. And I personally consider that a flub. I was expecting a 2008 Obama style run, but instead, we basically got a 2012 Obama run. And that's not good. Or worse, dare I say, a 2020 Joe Biden run. Actually worse than that, because it was more conservative than 2020. Anyway, there's some good policies there, like combating price gouging. Fantastic. Okay. Good defenses there, saying that Donald Trump's tariffs, which is the only economic policy that he's put forward, is actually a mass sales tax. Fantastic. Expert. Those are both great. Expanding Medicaid to at-home care. Fantastic. It's not enough. It's actually very marginal. And it's very frustrating that that's the only thing that the Democrats are pushing for. You should at least expand it down to 55. Like, you should lower the age. You should lower the age eligibility for Medicare to 55. That is literally the entry. That is like that's stepping in. Dental and vision as well. That's also important. They didn't really push that too much, but they realized that was actually popular messaging. So that definitely helped out. So on that front, that's great. Obviously, no separation from Biden on Gaza is a massive flub. That was a huge gimme. Donald Trump was beating Biden by like 30 points on the issue of Israel-Palestine. Donald Trump is now beating Kamala by the same percentage points on Israel-Palestine. And that's not a good idea. But having said all of that, why do I still think Kamala Harris is going to win? Because a lot of people will say, Hasan, you've said this already. You've ripped into Kamala Harris left and right. It's because you hate a black woman. You don't want her to succeed. Is that the reason? No. These are very real considerations. These are very real criticisms that I think are perfectly valid. I have time and time again showcased evidence, empirical evidence, messaging polls and whatnot to prove to you that what I'm saying is correct. And you can also go and watch those older videos as well. Now, I will, however, turn around and explain something very important to you. The person that was running an even worse campaign with also worse metrics overall, with a worse ceiling overall, was Donald Trump. That's it. While Kamala Harris made, in my opinion, a lot of communication mistakes, none were as bad as the routine garbanzo that you saw from Donald Trump throughout this entire process. Donald Trump's negatives are that he's too narcissistic and too chaotic and says a whole bunch of unhinged things. So much so that people who are in support of Donald Trump's ideology and ideals sometimes find themselves at odds with Donald Trump. Not to the same degree as like the MSNBC Never Trump Republicans, but certainly enough that they're like, I don't know if I'm going to go out and vote. Or in the finite amount of time that you have to make a convincing argument to not only have people be your supporters, but also go out and vote for you, Donald Trump fucked up big time. Nonstop, as a matter of fact. He had strong issues where he could have talked specifically about the economy, but there was no good policy on that front. He just kept saying, remember how good things were when I was president, trying to hold on to the nostalgia factor and the reality that Americans have short-term memory. He just kept saying, remember how good shit was when I was president. But even then, he didn't even hit that point hard enough because he was entirely too predisposed with the anti-immigrant screeds. His economic policy was tariffs, which is a really stupid idea that absolutely zero people agree with, especially because Donald Trump never communicated what he was going to put tariffs on. He just said across the board on all goods, specifically coming from China, which again is idiotic because it would destroy his number one industry of his supporters, Trump merchandise, right? That was a huge issue. And also, like I said, Kamala Harris's campaign did good counter messaging on that issue. So they are capable of doing that when they want to do it by effectively showing everyone that tariffs are just a mass sales tax and that China's not paying for it. It's actually American companies that are purchasing the Chinese manufactured goods that are paying for the tariff, and that cost will be offset. That will transfer over to the consumers. That was a massive mistake. Another indication that Trump's campaign has lost the juice and the sauce, and also its capability of reading the room, or rather maybe reading the wrong room a little too much, was the anti-trans ads. Now, I've talked to people who work for campaigns. I talk to them all the time. And there are people who would shock you that also agreed that the Trump campaign, the anti-trans campaign, was actually a banger. I was shocked personally when I heard that from people. I was like, what? Are you serious? And I had to sit there and explain to them why this is not a banger at all. A lot of people in the DC bubble are lost in the sauce a little bit, okay? And it is a sober reminder for me that those people are also on Twitter, okay? The Beltway demons are also on Twitter all the time, and their understanding of the world is also motivated by things that they see online. You're straight up wrong. Anti-trans rhetoric plays great to the base, and they're winning more and more anti-trans legislation every year, man. Yeah, that's right. It's so popular that they always have to package anti-trans legislation that literally fails usually if they try to actually do it through a democratic process, like the North Carolina trans bathroom bill. They had to go back to the drawing board and figure out a way to tie it to something that people do care about, which is sports. A meritocratic approach to sports is something that Americans still believe. And that's the only one that has actually penetrated public consciousness in a country where 64% of the population still say trans people are disproportionately targeted and it's unfair. People might be transphobic themselves. We heard the Trump supporter that Owen Jones was talking to look at the situation and basically say, I don't want my child to be trans. And then Owen Jones was like, okay, what if your child was like friends with a trans person? And the guy said, yeah, I wouldn't stop them. I'm not transphobic. There's a reason why even Jake Paul, who is incredibly transphobic, still feels the need to say that he does not hate anyone, including trans people, because at the end of the day, everyone's a liberal in this goddamn country. And that's something that you need to remember. What this means is that while most people think trans people are weird, most people are definitely slanted towards transphobia, given how rigid the gender binaries are in the way that it's been taught and how deeply personal our gender is in the way that we understand it, even though it's outdated, people still do not vote for anti-trans legislation. So if you have a finite amount of time to make a convincing argument, if you need to get people to come out and vote for you in the polls, you cannot run on an anti-trans panic narrative. You just simply cannot do that. And there is already a fantastic example, fantastic proof for this not working, and that is the 2022 midterms. People think it's weird to constantly and consistently on trans people. When it comes down to the election, most people are like, I just want food on my table, man. I care about the kitchen table. And trans issues are not kitchen table. This is something that I have consistently talked about and consistently defended. That is a big mistake for the Trump campaign. The constant hyper-focus, hyper-fixation comes across as weird to the normal whites. It comes across as weird unless you're hyper online and you watch Matt Walsh and you mainline the anti-trans stuff and you're participating in like the firebombing campaigns of like sending bomb threats to the children's hospital or whatever, which is a tiny, minuscule percentage of the Republican base. Most of the rest of the Republican Party are not that motivated. And all of the anti-trans legislation that has passed in this country has passed in the state legislature. That's it. And state legislatures are inherently undemocratic because of the way that redistricting works, because of the way that districts are drawn. That's it. You can tell me all day, every day that transphobia and trans panic is a really resilient, really good message, really good narrative. It's not. There is no evidence to suggest this. There is actually only evidence to prove that it has been an outward, unsuccessful way to campaign. A lot of people, even in the Republican base of support, view the anti-trans weirdos in the same exact way that they view the anti-abortion weirdos. You start looking like the type of dude who's really sweaty and really gross, parked outside of a Planned Parenthood, yelling at a 14-year-old trying to get birth control. Normal whites in the suburbs do not like that. They don't want to be associated with that. They find it weird. They might be transphobic themselves, but they still find it weird. This goes back to my theory of permissible bigotry. Very important theory. I know there's a lot of normies in here right now. They've probably never heard me talk about this. Okay, so I'm going to go through it really quickly. Due to social conditioning in a country like the United States of America, built on the foundation of white supremacy, indigenous genocide, and the continuation of chattel slavery, and an endless defense for capitalism, America is the perfect proto-capitalist nation, even before capitalism was codified and identified. There is a level of permissible bigotry that most people are on board with. I'll give you an example. It's called dog whistles, right? The Leet Atwater quote comes to mind. I'm going to run it really quickly so you understand exactly what I mean. This is Lee Atwater's famous 1981 interview on the Southern Strategy. There's going to be a warning. He's going to say the N-word a lot, okay? Just letting you know. In this audio made public for the first time ever, Atwater lays out how Republicans can win the vote of races without sounding racist themselves.
You start out in 1954 by saying by 1968, you can't say nigga, that hurts your backfire. So you say stuff like force busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing.
Yeah, by 2024, you can't say any of those things. So you say DEI, you say woke. Back in the day, it used to be affirmative action, right? States' rights is still a way to vaguely gesture to this kind of bigotry. Now, the question that I have for many Americans that are listening, that are tuning in right now, is why the need for dog whistles? Because there is only so much openly vitriolic, openly racist sentiment that Americans will be on board with. A Klansman wears a robe for a reason. A Nazi never wants to be called a Nazi for a reason. Racist people who are, some of them are your family members, you probably know what their opinions are, will not be on board with overt racism. There's a barrier, and that barrier changes. There's a boundary that changes of like what is permissible bigotry. And that happens through trends, that happens through, systematic differences, systematic changes. But ultimately, there is a level of permissible bigotry that you can get away with. An example of this is Donald Trump will say Kamala Harris is a low IQ person, right? That's a dog whistle. A black woman. Donald Trump is basically saying like she's a low IQ individual, she's a low IQ person. He can't say she's, I'm not going to repeat it, but like there are certain things that he can't say. The campaign is aware that, for example, Tony Hinchcliffe wanted to call her a cunt. They stopped Tony Hinchcliffe from saying that. They didn't stop Tony Hinchcliffe from calling Puerto Rico a trash island, an island full of trash, which of course hilariously backfired on the campaign. But that is the difference between permissible bigotry and bigotry that goes beyond that. You can talk about dominating women if you are a Republican. You can talk about being misogynistic, or you can be misogynistic to a certain degree. But once you reach above that degree, once you go beyond the degree of permissible bigotry, you are starting to lose people on your side. People who are even racist themselves don't want to be outwardly racist. They don't want to be associated with someone who is outwardly racist. And that is because a lot of people want to feel like they have the best interest of others in mind while simultaneously advocating against it. So Donald Trump has in the past danced around that permissible bigotry and has had moments where he has gone above, but he's been able to defend himself successfully in 2016 against attacks that were launched against him. But now that he is juiceless and sauceless, he no longer has that capacity. He just lets it rip quite frequently, as a matter of fact. And that, in my opinion, is why when he went on that national stage in front of Kamala Harris and said, Haitians are eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, and there's nothing you can do about it. And when he was asked about that, he was like, I saw it on TV. Even the majority of Republicans thought that was weird. Now, you might not recognize that if your only access to Republican communication is Twitter and YouTube. But when you look at 60 million people viewing that, they have a very different perspective on this stuff. And these are the people who themselves might be on board with mass deportation. And I don't think a lot of people recognize that. A lot of people in the Republican side do not recognize that. That's the problem. It's not going to have an immediate and noticeable impact in the polls if that's what you're looking for. But messaging polls that were conducted afterwards showed as such. There is a level of permissible bigotry. And if you go above that level of permissible bigotry, you come across as gross. That's the reason why J.D. Vance early on was shit on nonstop, was deeply unpopular, because in his endless brown nosing to like some of the grossest podcasters out there, he did the podcast route before he became the vice presidential pick. And in those uncovered interviews, he spoke about women as though they were broodmares, as though they were, they had one purpose, and that was to breed. You can't say that out loud. When you say that out loud, the rest of society hears you say that out loud. They're going to be like, ew, what the are you saying? Even if people themselves personally believe that. And that, I think, is a massive problem for Trump. When Trump consistently talks about immigration to a degree that is seemingly unconscionable by people who want those policies, he's not talking about the economy. Every moment that he spends saying 10 million Guatemalans are doing rapes, they're inventing new ways of raping people, that's a moment that he could have been talking about the economy, and he chose to really ham on this narrative. And that's why you have to look at what Trump's surrogates are saying versus look at what Trump is saying. Trump surrogates don't do that shit. They only talk about the economy. They literally only go, remember how good things were? Remember how good things were when Trump was president and how bad things are right now? Please stop asking me about, Trump's latest stupid thing that he said. That's it. And you know that Trump's people in his corner are telling him, please, sir, shut the fuck up about immigrants. Don't talk about it this much. Just talk about the economy, please. That and consistently saying you're going to sick the military on, your enemies from within. And the fact that you have still not given up on the 2020 election makes you look like a sore loser for a lot of people. These are the issues that Donald Trump is very weak on, and he has consistently leaned on his weak issues. Even on strong issues that he has, like immigration, he's going above and beyond. He's making normies uncomfortable, and that's a problem. Do you understand? These are some of the reasons why I am telling you, I think that Donald Trump has run an even worse campaign than Hillary Clinton. More importantly, Donald Trump is tapped out. Donald Trump was not only the president for 4 years, but Donald Trump also lost in 2020. That means that he has already reached peak Donald Trump. He's already maxed out on the amount of votes that he has gotten. He will never get that many votes ever again, especially because of, mail-in ballots and during COVID, obviously, turnout was significantly higher because it's easier to vote. For Donald Trump, the pathway to victory is a lot harder than Kamala Harris. He already has hit his ceiling. So that was already a massive issue for him. And he tried to basically pick up votes from wherever he could. That's the reason why he did like the Aiden Ross style, the podcast. That's the reason why he went after the podcaster vote. That's the reason why he's going after young men specifically. Young men who are low propensity voters in general and are not reliable voters at all. And there is a way to win over those young men to ensure that those young men come out and vote for you. Donald Trump did not do that. Ironically enough, Donald Trump, when he was communicating to young men directly on the podcast circuit, did what I consider harm reduction strategies, but from the right. We hear this all the time on the left. Harm reduction is a massive, massive part of the Democratic Party turnout strategy. It's a stupid way to do things, but Donald Trump was doing it as well. He did not tell young men why they must vote for him. He simply told young men, don't vote for Kamala Harris, vote for me instead. That is not going to be an effective turnout strategy for low propensity voters, which is why I'm still stating that I don't think that Donald Trump is going to drive massive turnout from young men that will come out and vote for him because he didn't offer them anything. With Hillary Clinton, he at least had so much opportunity to just keep highlighting how toxic this person was. Hillary Clinton was a beacon of all of the things that's wrong with American politics for many people. So he could at least get a couple of these like moderates or people who are independent, people who are low propensity voters to come out and vote for him because it was voting against Hillary Clinton. But you can't do that with Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris is a generic Democrat. Donald Trump in 2016 was able to present himself as an anti-establishment vote, someone who was going to blow up the institutions. And if you were angry with the institutions, you were looking forward to what he was going to do. You were like, you know what? Fuck it. I'll take a shot in the dark. Donald Trump also presented himself as a different kind of Republican in comparison to the rest of the party. He was incredibly moderate on social issues, with the exception of immigration. But he was ultimately viewed by the broader populace as a moderate on a lot of social issues. Donald Trump was pro-LGBT in 2016. All of these factors at play is the reason why I think Kamala Harris is still slated to win this election. That's it. These are the reasons as to why. These are the vibes-based analysis on top of everything else, on top of the polls that cause me to believe that Kamala's chances are better than Donald Trump's chances tomorrow. There's obviously a lot of facts involved in this as well, in terms of how certain messages work and how certain messages don't work. But ultimately, this is why I think I am still marginally favoring Kamala Harris winning. This does not mean Kamala Harris ran a fantastic campaign. Doesn't mean that at all. As a matter of fact, I think that Kamala Harris could have run a much better campaign and built on the momentum that she had gained early on. But she didn't do that. She could have still captured the attention of these suburban white women without refusing to advocate for any sort of policies that would help her base. So what this election is going to come down to tomorrow is this. Kamala Harris will win if she has not hemorrhaged enough of her base of support, black and brown voters, young voters in general, progressive-minded folks, or people who want, like, decent policies. If she has not hemorrhaged enough from the urban population centers, and she has been able to successfully detangle a lot of the college-educated suburban whites, which they've gone after pretty aggressively, and swing them away from Trump, like 2020 Trump voters going to Kamala Harris. There's not an indication in the polls that this has been successful so far, and maybe even bring out people who obviously care about abortion and care about this restriction coming down as a consequence of Donald Trump's Supreme Court. Kamala Harris will win. On the other hand, Donald Trump's shot in the dark approach is if he is able to not only drive turnout from low and mid propensity voters, which he's defeating Kamala Harris by massive margins on, if he's able to do massive turnout come election day, if the early voters have not cannibalized the election day voters for the Republican Party, then Donald Trump will win. And it will come down to the state of Pennsylvania. Kamala Harris's chances of winning this election, after looking at all of these facts and even matching the vibes, I guess, especially when you look at past performance for the Democratic Party, or if you look at current performance for the Democratic Party and the way that people view the Democratic Party overall in the United States of America versus the Republican Party, Kamala Harris's chances of winning this election are slightly higher than Donald Trump's chances of winning the election, because Donald Trump has a tougher go here. Can you explain the red mirage stuff that we'll see tomorrow? I have heard stuff about it, but don't understand it. I mean, this happened in 2020 as well. Red mirage basically is because Republicans in past election cycles have had a tendency to go and do same-day voting, that those votes are counted earlier and faster than mail-in ballots and early voters, and this varies by state, but that is the reason why it looks like, Republicans are winning in certain states. Early results give a false indication that the Republicans are actually winning by massive margins, and then once all the votes are counted, or when you look at certain projections, you can make a better analysis on who is projected to win, judging by past performance. A lot of people don't realize this, but like the official vote count does not come for sometimes weeks, if not months later. Most of the winners and losers are declared on the night of the election due to projections. That's why the media will say Associated Press is projecting a Kamala Harris victory. Now, they're usually right. There are very few instances where the media has ever gotten it wrong. And this was a big deal that especially Fox News projected certain states, Biden winning certain states on election night in 2020. That was a massively consequential thing that they did, where they actually operated with truth and integrity to a certain degree. Ironic, I know. And that really softened the amount of counter narratives that Trump could launch towards, like, oh, we're winning the election. He was very upset, if you recall. Having said that, I do not know if Fox News will do that this time around. And I'm genuinely worried that they will not be honest about their projection. So we shall see. I think I'm scared, but I think that there will be some unrest tomorrow. I don't think that is a wild thing to predict. I am genuinely fearful about this, but I do believe that there will be some unrest tomorrow because of the way that the Republican Party now operates, because of the way that Donald Trump has basically geared his base into believing that if he loses, or if it even seems like he's losing, then the election is stolen. Now, I don't know what kind of ground game they have in terms of like launching a Brooks Brothers style riot in each individual swing state, but it's definitely something that I am fearful of. I think it's not necessarily January 6th that we should be worried about, but more so Brooks Brothers is what we should be worried about happening in numerous states, in numerous cities.